There's a particular kind of frustration that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do and still not moving. You understand the task, you've thought it through, you may have even planned it out in detail, but when it's time to begin, something inside you resists. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to keep you still. It's confusing because nothing is unclear. You're not lacking information, you're not incapable, you're not even unmotivated. In fact, you probably care more than most people realize. That's part of what makes it so frustrating. If you didn't care, the delay wouldn't hurt. But you do care, and yet you don't start. In moments like this, your mind tends to turn against you. It asks sharp questions. Why can't I just do it? Why is this so hard? What's wrong with me? From the outside, it can look like avoidance. From the inside, it feels more like being stuck behind glass, aware, present, wanting to move, but unable to cross the invisible barrier. Most explanations focus on productivity or discipline. They assume that if you know what to do, you should be able to do it. But the lived experience is more complicated than that. Sometimes the problem isn't effort, it's emotional weight. A task is rarely just a task. It carries meaning, it carries expectations, it carries the possibility of success or failure. Even small things can become loaded. An email can feel like judgment, a report can feel like proof of competence, a creative project can feel like exposure. When something holds emotional weight, starting it feels riskier than we consciously admit. And when something feels risky, even in subtle ways, hesitation appears. You might notice that the more important a task feels, the harder it becomes to begin. That's not coincidence. Importance amplifies meaning, and meaning amplifies pressure. Pressure doesn't always create action. Sometimes it creates stillness. You sit there, thinking about the task, rehearsing it in your head. You imagine how it should go. You imagine how it might go wrong. You imagine how you'll feel afterward. In trying to prepare yourself, you unintentionally inflate the moment. Now you're not just beginning something simple, you're stepping into something significant. That significance can feel heavy, and heaviness slows movement. This is why you can sometimes act easily under external pressure, but freeze when the pressure is internal. When a deadline is immediate and outside of you, there's less room for interpretation. The decision is made. You move. But when the decision is yours, when the meaning is yours, hesitation grows. It's not confusion, it's caution. Part of you wants to protect yourself from the discomfort that might follow. If you start and it doesn't go well, you have to face that reality. If you don't start, the outcome stays theoretical. Possibility remains intact. Staying still preserves potential. Starting makes things real. That's a vulnerable shift. No one likes to think of themselves as avoiding reality, especially when they're intelligent and capable. But this isn't avoidance in the lazy sense. It's a subtle instinct to protect identity. If this task matters, then what it reveals might matter too. That's why the freeze can feel disproportionate to the task itself. It isn't about the mechanics, it's about what the task represents. When you understand that, the experience begins to make more sense. The problem isn't that you don't know what to do. The problem is that doing it feels like it carries emotional exposure, and exposure makes us hesitate. The mistake many people make at this point is assuming they need more discipline. They tell themselves to push harder, to override the feeling, to ignore the hesitation. But force doesn't dissolve emotional weight. It often increases it. If you criticize yourself for not starting, you add another layer to the task. Now, it's not just about the work, it's about proving that you're capable. The stakes rise, the weight grows heavier, the pause becomes longer. Over time, this can create a pattern. You begin to associate important tasks with tension. The moment you sit down to begin, your body anticipates strain. That anticipation alone can slow you down. It's not dramatic, it's subtle. a tightening in your chest, a sense of heaviness, a quiet thought that says, "This is going to be hard." And once that thought appears, starting feels like stepping into discomfort rather than progress. The irony is that you might be someone who handles complexity well. You might be thoughtful, analytical, capable of managing difficult conversations or solving intricate problems. But when something touches your sense of self, your competence, your creativity, your value, hesitation appears. Because now it's personal. When a task becomes personal, it stops being neutral, and neutrality is what makes action easy. Think about moments when you move effortlessly, brushing your teeth, replying to a simple message, folding laundry. These actions carry little meaning. They don't threaten identity. They don't measure your worth. So you do them without friction.
But when something feels tied to who you are or who you want to be, the emotional stakes rise, even if no one else is watching. Especially if no one else is watching, because now it's just you and your own expectations. That can be loud, and loudness creates hesitation. This doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. We all protect our identities in quiet ways. We all avoid moments that feel like evaluation. The difference is that some people interpret hesitation as information, while others interpret it as failure. If you see it as failure, shame enters. Shame adds more weight. More weight increases hesitation. The loop tightens. If you see it as information, something shifts. You begin to ask different questions. Not, "Why can't I do this?" but "What feels exposed here?" That question softens the moment. Maybe the task feels overwhelming because it matters. Maybe it feels heavy because you care. Maybe the hesitation is simply a sign that this isn't neutral to you. And that's not a flaw. It's a sign of investment. There's a quiet courage in starting something that matters. We don't often frame it that way. We frame starting as discipline, but often it's bravery. Bravery isn't loud. It's small. It's typing one imperfect sentence. It's sending one vulnerable email. It's beginning before you feel certain. Notice that in those moments when you finally do begin, the fear rarely disappears entirely. It just becomes tolerable. The act of starting reduces the intensity of the imagined outcome. Reality is almost always smaller than the story you build around it. The freeze happens in the story. The movement happens in reality. When you bring your focus back to what is actually in front of you, not what it means, not what it says about you, not what it could become, the emotional charge lowers. You don't have to solve your entire future. You don't have to prove anything about yourself. You don't have to confirm your potential. You just have to begin this one moment. That reframing shifts the weight. Instead of "this determines everything," it becomes "this is one step." Instead of "this says something about me," it becomes "this is something I'm doing." The more you separate your identity from your actions, the lighter starting becomes. You are not your output. You are not your productivity. You are not the quality of a single attempt. When that sinks in, even slightly, the hesitation loses some of its grip. Because now the task isn't threatening who you are, it's just a task. And tasks, when stripped of meaning, are manageable. This is why self-compassion isn't indulgent, it's stabilizing. When you allow yourself to begin imperfectly, you reduce the emotional exposure. You give yourself permission to act without attaching your worth to the outcome. That permission creates space, and space allows movement. You may still feel a flicker of resistance, that's normal, but it no longer feels like a wall. It feels like a small hill, and small hills can be climbed. The next time you find yourself stuck, notice the meaning you've attached to the task. Notice the story you're telling about what it represents. Notice how much of your identity feels wrapped up in it. Then gently untangle it. This doesn't determine everything. This doesn't define you. This is simply one action. When the emotional weight decreases, the body follows. Action doesn't always require intensity. It often requires safety. When you feel safe enough to be imperfect, you move more easily. And movement, even quiet movement, changes the atmosphere. It reminds you that you are capable, not because you forced yourself, but because you allowed yourself. There's strength in that. The frustration of knowing what to do but not starting isn't a sign that something is broken inside you. It's often a sign that something matters to you. And when something matters, beginning it asks for vulnerability. That's not a weakness, that's depth. If you can meet that moment with understanding instead of criticism, you'll notice something subtle but powerful. The pause shortens, not because you became more disciplined, but because you stopped making the first step mean everything. And when it doesn't mean everything, it becomes possible. Sometimes starting isn't about willpower at all. Sometimes it's about making the moment small enough that it no longer feels like a verdict. Just a beginning, nothing more. And that is enough.